Thank you very much, Jill, and thanks again for everybody attending today. I know right now everyone's working a little bit differently, so I thought it'd be a good chance to revisit sort of good disciplines, good ways to focus on controlling data, and of course answer your questions. So let's get started. So I think it's safe to say that in the past couple months, the way we look at remote work has really changed dramatically. When in the beginning of this year, I think everybody, if you said come to my office, you had a typical idea what you might find there. A centralized workforce, everybody in their cubes, meetings that were kind of unrestrained, if you will. And then people who worked remotely, I know every so often I would work remotely or I would travel and I would do some remote work. And these things were kind of considered like bonuses, nice things to have. They weren't really considered necessities, but obviously that changed. With our clients, right as this happened, basically the start of March or so, the remote work, which was kind of a side thing for a lot of our clients, sort of became, how do we get all of our people working remotely right this second? And these are reactions as opposed to planned adjustments, which is fine considering the fact that this was something that was unprecedented. But today, I think we need to pivot a little bit and say, okay, well, now everybody's going to be working differently. And I think even as things maybe open up, I know in Maryland we're in phase 1 right now. I don't think the workplace and how we work is really going to be the same for some time. We're going to have this sort of hybrid work from home in the office stuff. So we should talk about how to protect the privacy, integrity, and availability of our important data in this remote work era. And then think about where our technology matches up. We should be looking at this as a time to do a technology assessment, just like we would if we changed offices or the organization of our staff or changing our application, because the importance of our work has really changed. So today, we have a few things we want to talk about. So we're going to revisit the concept of stakeholders to understand what matters and shape decisions. So we really do need to understand who's impacted by the data that we are controlling, because that's going to impact a lot of our decision-making process. We're going to talk about policy considerations and communication and how workforce decentralization impacts this. So just to talk about DP Solutions for a moment and how this is with us, our staff is almost entirely remote right now. We have a few people trickling into the office, but we've had to change the way we work in terms of communications, check-ins, and things, because our team isn't gathered in the office. We can't just bring everybody in the conference room, and even when more people come into the conference room, we probably can't do that the way we did earlier this year. We're going to talk a little bit about technical tools that can help support your data management, including effective data transport and privacy in transit. So we're going to revisit the sort of tools you need that if you have people who are working all over maybe the state or the country or the world, what can we do to support data management and keep things private and secure? We're going to talk about how we look at storage options for the data and where they make sense. So, again, these concepts, these initial ideas aren't necessarily new. The technology there isn't necessarily new, but how we look at them has really changed quite a bit. And then, of course, probably the most important part is Q&A. So, obviously we have some ideas, things we want to cover in the webinar today, but as always, this is about you guys and what matters to you. So I really encourage you to ask questions about your concerns. So data stakeholders. So what is a data stakeholder? Why does this stuff matter? So it's really very common that organizations start implementing systems and implementing policies and stuff like that before understanding the value of their data internally and externally. And what that means, I think, is that they really haven't identified who the data stakeholders are. And really, that's anybody who has an interest in the data. So why is this important, right? When we're talking about what we do on a day-to-day basis and the data we collect and the products we output to our clients, whether it's a service or maybe a tangible item, if we don't understand the liabilities that we hold when we take data in and work with it to ourselves as an organization, to our colleagues, our coworkers who have to be productive with this, to the subjects of that data. You know, if it's a data that we're liable for, perhaps PII data or healthcare data or anything like that. If we don't identify all of these stakeholders, then we can't really make good technology decisions, even if things functionally work correctly. So a data stakeholder is anybody who has an interest in the data. And you should be identifying who the stakeholders are with every piece of data that you collect and manage. So a few examples would be like your staff. You know, they have a productivity interest in data. If I'm working in my home right now, and if I can't get access to the stuff we have in, for example, ConnectWise or my email or Teams or some of the tools I use, well, then I can't really work. I'm a stakeholder in that. And so my systems have to support my interests as a staff member. You have your business partners who may also rely on your data to do their job. So, you know, let's say for the sake of argument that you are a healthcare provider and you're passing information off to an insurance company that pays you on a claim. Well, you know, those are partners. If you can't get information to the insurance provider so that you can file your claims and get paid from insurance companies, well, they're a stakeholder in your data. Individuals who are personally affected by your use of data, even if they aren't customers. A research firm that collects PII is a great example. If you think about HIPAA compliance or PCI compliance or GDPR in the case of the European Union, you know, you may never interact with some of these individuals in which you collect data, but they are personally impacted if you breach that data. You know, I don't have a personal relationship with Equifax. I mean, not in the most personal sense, but they have my data and they're liable to me if they breach my social security number. A company that collects my health insurance data information to file a claim, I may never meet them, but if they breach my data, that they're still liable to me. So we have to consider the subjects of our data. Another one would be the government. So, you know, especially relevant in the case of government contractors. So, you know, if I'm collecting contracting information or sensitive information to the government, or the government just has an interest in protecting information on behalf of the consumer or the individual, they would be a stakeholder too. And a lot of the data we collect is subject to the government. So, you know, think about what you need to get done for your job, how you, what kind of data you collect, who cares about it, what are the privacy, integrity, and availability concerns. You know, if we don't have the answers to these questions, then I don't think we can really make good decisions. And I don't really think we can feel confident that the tools and practices we use are enough. And a lot of people don't answer this stuff before they start making the technology decisions that are relevant. Another aspect that we need to talk about is policy and communication. So if we're going to manage our data well, we need to create the right mindset for data protection. So the leadership really starts with management. So really illustrating to the staff what they need to do in order to protect data. If we don't have a good philosophy in place and good processes in place internally where people care about things and understand what's expected from them from management, you can't expect them to act expect them to act responsibly with the data. So one thing you need to communicate is what data is sensitive. So we all interact with all sorts of pieces of information, but I think a lot of times, especially in the small business space, not everybody really understands what data is more meaningful than others, right? If the example I always use is if I send an email around the company asking what pizza I want for lunch today and what toppings need to go on it, that's not really sensitive data. And if that information gets out there, nobody's going to be barking at me to address it. But if I lose my client's information on their system, or I lose the credit card information I collected from a customer or something like that, that data is sensitive, and we need to illustrate to people who work for us what data matters and what is expected of them and why it needs to not be breached. Because maybe they run into situations where they don't know what to do necessarily. If they can actually think, well, this is what is sensitive to us and what matters and what the consequences are of a data breach, then they can maybe make good judgments and avoid the failings here. Another thing we need to define in our policy and communication is incident management and communication procedures. So staff needs to know who to talk to in the event of loss, breach, downtime, anything. And the activities should be consistent. So we should really make sure that every time we have some kind of incident or communication procedure, we should be handling it in a similar way every time. It shouldn't be that people are operating in different ways for the same kind of incident. And we should really consider, as part of these incidents to manage, things like fraud from phishing as well. This is super critical, especially now. I mean, somebody might have an incident. You know, I'm working in my home by myself, and if I have an incident and I'm not sitting, you know, next to Jill in her office physically, where I can maybe just walk over there and ask her a question, it's super important that somebody knows when the pressure is on them in their home and they're not seeing somebody for maybe the next several weeks, how they communicate these incidents so that they're handled properly. So this is a really, really important thing, especially right now. And especially because these phishing things are becoming more and more significant with COVID-19. We've seen phishing attacks on the rise, actually, which I know I've been saying that a lot in general, but I think specifically now they've been going up even more. We should define acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. So these are the things you are allowed to do with the technology and the things you aren't allowed to do. Unless we really define what's okay and what's not, it's going to be difficult to get people to do the right thing. So this can extend to things like what devices people are allowed to use to access data. It could talk about where data is allowed to be accessed, stored, and transmitted. So, you know, for example, at DP Solutions, you can keep your files on our file server. You can keep them in your Teams for the Teams relevant stuff. You can put data in ConnectWise, but what people should not be doing at DP Solutions is using their personal Google account to store DP Solutions information, because that's a violation of policy. It's an unacceptable behavior. Stuff like that. These rules are all very basic. These are the technologies that we approve and that we have control of and that we can monitor and meet the standard that we're looking to meet. And everything else is not allowed unless discussed with management and vetted accordingly. Change management and review of policies. So one thing we need to do, and this is usually on the management/leadership side, is have good policies for change and review. So when we want to make a change to a system or the way we work or any of these things, this is the process in which we make those changes so that we're not going rogue and we're not making a new rule that says, hey, the project department gets to work in this system now, and we're just doing it. You know, this change management process has to occur in a transparent and defined way. Define roles and responsibilities for management and staff. So this would be for any kind of specific actions as it pertains to managing your data or keeping things controlled. And this could include things like monitoring backups. You know, that for a lot of our clients, that's something that DP Solutions does. Technical troubleshooting, policy review, system changes, compliance management, third-party communications, etc. When we have these policies that say, here's how you handle an incident, or here's how a change happens, or here's the acceptable use thing, we should be able to say, here are the people on our team that are responsible for managing these things. These are our champions for managing these roles, so that everybody knows not one person can handle all of these things, but these are the individuals who are responsible for their specific areas. So that's very, very important. The data needs to live and communicate within controlled and viable systems. So again, we shouldn't be using unauthorized flash drives, cloud storage solutions, devices not in inventory, so on, even if that's inconvenient. So everything needs to be visible. We need to be able to say, if somebody asked us, a third-party auditor, for example, asked us, hey, where is all of your controlled unclassified information if it was a government contractor? we should say, oh, well, that data exists specifically on our SharePoint site that is accessible by these people in this way, and here's all the governance behind it. We shouldn't be able to say, well, we think it's here, and some of it might be also in these things, and then people have their own phones. It has to be very clear and specific. So, no policy is perfect, but good communication will help the organization create the discipline and environment to minimize risks when it comes to managing data. So it's better to be engaged and aware of stuff. There's always going to be holes. There's always going to be gaps. That's why you do an evaluation process. That's why you have change management and review of policies. That's why when things happen like COVID-19 and we have had to change things rapidly, we go back and see, are our goals the same? Are our challenges the same? Do we have to relook at the way we work? The assumptions are now different, but the communication and management really lead to the success and failure more than the technology itself. Of course, there is a lot of technology to actually control data and protect ourselves. So we'll just talk about a few things. These are high-level concepts to consider. Obviously, the solutions specific to you are going to vary, and you could go down some big rabbit holes when it comes to this stuff. So whenever possible, we should utilize technology to limit risks associated with data. So we'll go over a few of them real quick. The first one, and it's a big one, is the whole concept of encryption and transitor at rest. So for those who are unfamiliar with encryption, encryption is basically coding the data in a way that's unreadable by people without a key. So if me and Jill speak the same language and nobody else speaks that language, then we can talk openly and nobody can understand what we're saying because we're speaking in our own code. That's what encryption is. Encryption is found in all sorts of things, from the VPNs where data is traveling encrypted in encrypted tunnels from point to point. You could talk about things like encrypted emails, where a email is in sort of an encryption bubble as it goes from one mail server to another. You could talk about things like SSL. So when you an SSL certificate, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about but maybe don't know, when you go and you're about to make a credit card purchase, you're on Amazon, you're logging in, and now you're about to send Amazon your credit card information, a SSL certificate could be used to encrypt that stuff in transit. There's also the idea with at rest, using that same kind of encryption to protect data at rest. If I have my laptop and my laptop contains all the sensitive data on it, and then I lose it and somebody pops the hard drive out and wants to read the data, if that drive is encrypted, they can't read my language, then our data is protected. This may be important right now if you have a lot of people who are using maybe company devices or mobile phones that have data on them but are maybe losable or stealable. So we should be wondering whether that's something important. Another thing to look at is rights management. So data needs to be organized in a logical way as it relates to sensitivity. So we should have, if there is particularly sensitive data, that data should only be accessible by certain people who have the rights to see them. And then those rights can be created from there to limit access and by extension limit risks. So if I have my credit card information stored in a specific place, and I know that these people are the ones who have the rights to access it, I can make sure that only those people have it. I can create special security around that information that goes within PCI guidelines, so on and so forth. But until we organize that information and we classify that information, which I talked about a little bit earlier, identifying the sensitive data and the stakeholders, we can't really create that rights management that's so important. There's also mobile device management. So right now, mobile devices in particular, everyone's using Bring Your Own Device, BYOD. It's really important to have tools in place to cut off access or storage of data if the device is lost or the staff member moves on, or even furthermore, create basic security rules on the phone. It's not going to surprise many of you that a lot of people who use smartphones maybe don't set up all the configurations that they could to password protected or make sure the apps are updated and things like that to make sure that these devices are secure, so that if you are sending a sensitive email on them or accessing a sensitive file on those mobile devices, that's done so in the safest way possible. So mobile device management can assist with this and create this centralized governance. So if you're using cell phones right now or tablets, or even perhaps personal laptops to access company information, and you're not sure about the security, I would consider mobile device management, and we can talk with more about that offline. Another important thing to control data is the access, and this is really on the access side, is multi-factor authentication. So honestly, I believe multi-factor authentication is a low bar now instead of a high bar when it comes to security. Multi-factor authentication is a tool that goes beyond a username and password to log in. It is also a token, something that you control. Maybe it's a text message to your personal cell phone. Maybe it's an app that you can carry on your phone, or a physical token that provides a code that is constantly changing. And the idea is that if somebody cracks your username and password, or wants to pretend that they're you accessing your system, which is a big concern now when you have everyone decentralized, everybody's working in different places. How do we know that Ben Schmerler is the guy who is accessing Microsoft Teams right now? A great way to do this is to have multi-factor authentication, where the text is going to go to Ben's cell phone. He's going to be the one that sees it and type in that code in the 1-minute window. And then we can be reasonably sure that it's Ben accessing this stuff and not someone pretending to be Ben. A lot of compliance standards are insisting on it. I think it's a very good idea, especially now. I think as you see more of these web-based applications, it's going to be more of a requirement. If you're in financial services or banking or something like that, you're seeing that it's everywhere already. So I'd really encourage you that if there are systems that you access and the data within them is sensitive, and you're really concerned about a breach or loss, consider where multi-factor authentication can help you, and we can talk with you more about that. Storage, so really important to talk about where this stuff actually goes. There are a lot of solutions out there for storing files. The right solution will vary based on how you work. Really, as I said earlier, the technology hasn't actually changed all that much. The storage solutions haven't really changed in the last 3 months, but I think the factors impacting your technology success when it comes to storing have really changed. It's really taken a huge 180. One thing that I think is really fortunate as sort of a silver lining to what's going on is that there are so many technology solutions to address this stuff. I've said many times, like, I can't imagine what this would be like if it were, when I started out in my professional career in 2005, things were just so much different. We had terminal servers, but the use of them was so much less. There was way less bandwidth available to access this stuff. The smart devices were really in their infancy. So we're fortunate that we're able to do so much with technology now. So the decision-making process hasn't really changed, but we just have to look at the factors completely differently. So there's obviously the cloud-based solutions, and for cloud-based solutions, I'd consider this to be things like SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive, any of these hosted solutions where stuff is stored with usually a big company. The advantage right now, and the way to look at this, especially with people who are remote, is these are pretty stable solutions. I don't hear too many people complaining. Obviously, these things do go down or fail, but Teams has been relatively stable. Microsoft's been relatively stable. So has Google. These things tend to stay up pretty well, certainly better than a physical server that you would buy yourself in, either through distribution or maybe even a consumer level product. The big issue may be stuff like if you want to transfer a big file to a cloud hosted provider, and that file is larger than your pipe. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you guys know that I record these videos sometimes with tech tips, and I'm saving these big video files for us to edit. I need to find a way that I can actually transfer this file that could be gigabytes even to someone else who has to edit them. And I need the file storage location that can accept those kinds of files. I need to know that my internet connection can support those kinds of files, or I need to change my file format. This all sort of starts with what kind of data we're using and where people are actually working. So you have to ask yourselves those questions, and then you can determine whether a cloud-based solution might present a challenge for that kind of data. There's also the quote-unquote local or physical solutions. So I would consider this anything like a physical file server, a network attached storage device, or a NAS device, maybe even a PC doing the processing itself. Basically, just a box that you have somewhere that stores data. This was the way everything used to be. Everything used to be on a server or stored on a physical device, and now we're seeing more people move to the cloud. So these are becoming, honestly, a little, I think, even more passe because our workforce is being decentralized. It makes a lot less sense even now to have a data center in your office if you know 15% of your staff is coming into the office every day. Now your data center is now file serving to all of these people in remote sites, and that internet connection that you had in your office that was sufficient when maybe 2 or 3 people were accessing this stuff remotely is no longer sufficient when it's 45 people accessing this stuff remotely. So these local and physical solutions are really fast when you're close to it and slow when you aren't, and there's more risk to maintain them. I'm not going to say that you don't need these things. A lot of times the data or the use case is going to dictate local storage, but I think we're moving to a situation where these are going to become even more niche, and this is kind of accelerating a trend that already existed a little while ago. So a few more points on storage I wanted to get into. The way we view these products is flipped. I just spoke to that. I think it used to be that, we'll get the in-house stuff because maybe it's cheaper or we can get that speed and it's better for us to do this than access this stuff over an internet connection all day. Well, now everybody's accessing stuff over internet connections, and that local solution is a lot harder to use for a lot of people. So now may be a time to make a change with how you store files if you're experiencing these kinds of challenges. Contrary to, I think, a lot of misconceptions, I believe the cloud solutions provide more control. Physical local solutions sort of give the illusion of control. I think people worry sometimes, well, if I put my data out in Microsoft's cloud, well, then Microsoft has it and I don't. I don't have physical control of the device. And yeah, that's true. But I think that's kind of an illusion of control, because the device that's local, you don't have control over the physical failure of the device necessarily. They're just less reliable and not as redundant as something that an enterprise like Microsoft can build. And you don't have some of the other controls like physical security, power management, backup that some of the cloud solutions offer. And so I think cloud solutions actually provide more control, especially when you're going with a big, stable company like a Microsoft, like a Google, stuff like that. Bandwidth and devices are playing a bigger role than before. So in the past, I think you used to have to say, on an individual case, how much bandwidth does my office need to have to be able to do this work? Now it's more like, what does each individual person who maybe works around the state, what are they using to access our stuff? And how much bandwidth do they have? And what devices are they using from their home? And how is that going to impact the solution I use? The good thing about using some of the cloud storage solutions and the cloud products in general is that they're trying to become a lot more device agnostic. And again, speaking to the idea of trends, this is sort of accelerating a trend that already existed. While it made sense to really, standardize a lot of the hardware and solutions we were using before in the office, COVID-19 kind of forced that out the window when a lot of people had to use their own devices to access the stuff. So it's really important to consider that. Data identification and sensitive data policies play an outside role in making good choices. So what I mean by that is, depending on some of these earlier questions about what kind of data you have, how sensitive it is, so on and so forth, you may not have a choice into what solution you use, right? If I'm carrying, for example, sensitive government information, I can't just go out and say, I'm going to use Google Drive to store this information. That would not be considered a compliance solution, even if functionally that works. My people like using it and it's fast enough and it works with all their devices and all that stuff. If it doesn't meet our criteria when it comes to the data stakeholders and the compliance needs, we can't use it. So That's a checkbox we have to hit when we come to picking out our data solutions and managing them. I've talked about this before. Staff should understand the implications of the technology chosen. So they have to understand, hey, we're using SharePoint Online to store this data, and we're doing this because it's secure and we can control it and it's compliant to our stuff, and that's why we're using it. And you say, well, why does that matter? Shouldn't people just use the things we control? I think people, in the end of the day, need to understand why this stuff matters so that they want to use it. I think if people don't understand the importance why these decisions were made, then they tend to break the rules. Because if they don't feel like there's actually any impact by them breaking the rules, they're going to go around that. So we should really explain to people, hey, this is the solutions we use and this is why we use them. We don't have to get into a whole song and dance about it, but we should certainly be transparent. So for our final thought before we get into Q&A, just a few last points. I've brought up a few times, anytime, anywhere was already a trend. COVID-19 has accelerated it. I know, my travel has stopped. I used to do maybe once every 6 weeks or so. I used to, fly somewhere for a work event. And it was great that I could, pick up my laptop and my cell phone and get all this stuff done. And so when I started working from home as a rule, I was in good shape. I was able to pretty much get things done. But for others, I think that this has been a much more rapid change and has pushed this trend forward. So I think COVID-19 has really accelerated this stuff. So the rapid change, though, part of this, where we've had to make all these adjustments very quickly, has left blind spots. So think about how now that we are, a couple months into this, and we probably are facing some permanent changes to how people work. I don't know. I've heard a lot on other conference calls and webinars. I've heard, just some businesses rethinking the role of the office, period. Regardless of whether the public health crisis ends, they are questioning whether they even need as many people in the office. So you should really be thinking about right now, how has your work changed and what does your technology do that's not maybe as good as it was 6 months ago when we were just in a different work paradigm? It's really the time to consider an assessment. In addition to the work itself changing, the risk towards data use has changed. People are decentralized and phishing is way up. So we need to reevaluate how people are working and consider how that impacts our security tools. The tools we used before are probably still good, but they may apply differently. It's really important that we look at this again. Policy was always important, communication was always important, but engagement is really even more critical now. As a good rule, regardless of the data security or privacy concerns, we do this at DP Solutions, and I really think it's great where our departments have regular check-in calls. We have one-on-ones. We do the small things to check in on people and communicate with one another and engage with each other virtually, because people are on these sort of islands, and obviously this has a big impact on making sure people are responsible just as workers, but it will have an impact on how they act with sensitive data too. So check in with your people, have that consistent engagement, check in on them within reason, obviously. This engagement is super, super important. And with that, we'll move to Q&A. And while we're pulling questions, I'll talk very briefly. We're going to talk next month about digital transformation for the small business. So you may have heard the buzz term, digital transformation. Digital transformation as a concept has really accelerated because of COVID-19. A lot of organizations that were doing things by hand or on paper or manually are really being forced to revisit the way they work. And things like virtual meetings and how to do them, where things are stored, how we present to clients. This is really, the businesses that are going to be successful in the future, I think, are going to have to embrace this digital transformation. We were already moving in this direction. Now we're going to be pushed further and further and further. So we felt like it's a good idea to talk about it. So I really look forward to talking about this and having you all there. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jill. And what kind of questions do we have, Jill?
Okay, great, thanks. As a reminder, if you do have questions, please feel free to type them in the question box and we will read them for you. Our first question, Ben, is it safe to share files over email?
It can be, and it can also not be. So think about regular emails. So if I just write Jill an email and it's, just whatever, and I just send it over the public internet with no special, nothing special on it, even if I know that I'm the one sending the email and Jill's on the other end, let's say that side is, we're feeling good about that. Once that data leaves my inbox or my mailbox and goes to her, it goes over the public internet just like for any other regular traffic. And so people who have the know-how to sniff traffic and read stuff that travels over a line could theoretically read that unencrypted information. So by default, not everything that is sent over email is secure. And that's why there are email encryption solutions from things like the built-in Office 365 tools. I know we offer Proofpoint encryption for some emails. And I would really encourage you that if you're sending particularly sensitive things over email that you're worried about the data in transit, to either adopt an encrypted email solution or revisit the way that information is transmitted from one point to the other. Because you really should have that sensitive stuff encrypted in transit.
Okay, excellent. All right, our next question is, are there risks to using peer-to-peer or P2P file sharing?
There are many risks. So first, if I would be careful about who you're sharing with and in what regards. I mean, peer-to-peer file sharing is how a lot of malware is transmitted in general. So I would watch out for that. Additionally, peer-to-peer stuff, this sort of gets into the multi-factor authentication piece. So if I have a peer-to-peer file share with Jill, and let's say we connect on something, and then I share a file with Jill, but Jill's account is compromised because someone's broken her username and password, then now I'm peer-to-peer file sharing a sensitive piece of information with some stranger. And so I would really encourage, if you're using that stuff, to consider multi-factor authentication and the use with that. Additionally, just like email, if I'm using peer-to-peer file transfers and that information is sensitive, I need to be assured that that is a encrypted transmission mode. So not all peer-to-peer file solutions do that. Some of them are just send off the file, which can be very convenient but not particularly secure. We always have to know that stuff, and not just that. I mean, I think people have heard about how services like Zoom have been compromised, etc. I don't really want to take anything for granted for these solutions that they're secure. We have to build security and controls around all this stuff and have good discipline and behaviors, because nothing, even if the core solution is secure, what about all the things surrounding it? The people, the device, the data itself, all that stuff.
Okay, great, thank you. And we'd have one more question that came in. You mentioned Microsoft Teams. How safe are the files I share over Microsoft Teams?
So the good thing about Microsoft Teams, especially if you know and you feel confident that the files that are being shared amongst your team on Microsoft Teams, that everyone is connecting to it securely, they're using multi-factor authentication, and then I share a file, well, I can be reasonably assured that the person sharing that file with me is not sharing malware. Now, that's no guarantee, because what if I'm, again, getting back to the example, I share files with, as a matter of fact, I do share files with Jill over Microsoft Teams. I wrote a script recently for a video we're going to record, and I shared that with her on Microsoft Teams. And first of all, I'm pretty certain that Jill's the one who got it. Not only that, the information, my script is not particularly sensitive. No one's going to sue DP Solutions if my script gets out there. The bigger concern is the device that I created that script on secure, so that the file I created doesn't have some kind of virus attached to it or something like that, some kind of Trojan or something like that. And that comes from managing devices. And this gets back to another point about securing all this stuff with a decentralized workforce. Are the devices that we're managing that access this data, whether it's a personally owned device or a company owned device, have the right tools and management on it so that I'm not impacting the integrity of my data by getting it infected and then sharing those infections over our secured protocols like Microsoft Teams to share that information. So again, it gets back to sort of the point I made on the previous question, which was we have to control all aspects of this stuff, the device itself, the channel in which we share it, the way we authenticate into it, all of it. And when we do all of those things, then we can feel reasonably good about working in these kinds of ways. And things will still happen. I don't want to pretend that even if we do all the right things, that incidents can't happen. But the idea of this is to bring our risk level to an acceptable level, just like we do in anything else in our lives, which is the same. Just like right now with and just like with COVID-19, we still have to get groceries. We still have to get prescriptions and do sensitive stuff, but we control our risk by wearing our excuse me, wearing our masks, not going to crowded places, washing our hands, doing all that stuff. It doesn't mean we won't get the virus. I mean, it's unfortunately the evidence has proven otherwise, but our risks are lower, and we should do this. We should look at it the same way with our IT stuff. Jill, do we have any other questions?
No, Ben. Looks like those are everything.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you found this information helpful. We record these things and put them on the website, so you'll have access to it. Please don't hesitate to follow up with me or anybody on our team if you have further questions. Thanks again so much, and I look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.